It's disorganized play. Wah, 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 wah. Oh, I almost did a sad trombone noise on my own intro. Hey, that's that is inappropriate and yet fitting at the same time, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me for Disorganized Play. We every Tuesday we spend about an hour talking about running games. I'm running a game of Dungeons and Dragons 5th Edition. I'm DMing the adventure, the Sunless Citadel, as part of the Yawning Portal collection. So every week on Wednesday, I sit down and run that game. Well, every week on Tuesday, I sit down and talk to you about what I need to think about in order to prep that game, and also share tips, techniques, insight, my own personal GMing philosophy, and rejoinders, as it were. So, thank you so much for joining us. You watch it on Wednesday, and then on Thursday I come back and tell you how whatever I did was not what I prepared, as you may have seen last week, where the party just took a right turn off of what I thought they were going to do, and went back and explored some areas of the dungeon, which was fine. It was fun. It was interesting. As we talked last week, sometimes it's fun to just follow the players and not have to worry about funneling them along and chasing them around, trying to figure out, well, okay, where do we have to bend the plot here and twist the clues there and tinker with the NPCs along the way. Well, guess what we're going to do today? We're going to do a couple things. We're going to take a look at how our plot is coming along with a little tool that I call Plot Radar. We'll see that in a moment. I am going to talk about reskinning encounters, tweaking things, because we have introduced sort of some new themes into the adventure that either weren't there before or were maybe kind of incomplete before. It's a combination of things where there's this whole Gulthias tree, Belloc, big bad sorcerer type of stuff that's foreordained in the adventure as written. It's intersected with some of our PCs in ways that are not anticipated by the module, so we have to do some tweaking around that as well. We're going to talk about A Leap Ahead. That's going to be an interesting conversation, probably a brief one, but I have a little surprise in store for everyone there. And then I just want to make sure, this is really for me, not to forget to talk about our Alzheimer's Association Charity Marathon that's going on this weekend that we're starting Friday night. So I had to put that on the agenda just to make sure that I wouldn't forget it. I've got a lot of stuff to do for it, so it would be surprising to forget, but I want to make sure that it showed up on the agenda. So that's our agenda for the day. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me. And, if you have a question or two or whatever, go ahead and pop it in the chat. But with that in mind, let's get started with the task as set before us, shall we? So, first off, we're going to ping Plot Radar. So, for those of you who are not familiar, Plot Radar is a Kanban style of tool that I use in order to track the themes and the plot elements and the clues that have been dumped into. My phone just went off. I'll be right back. I thought maybe Dom was messaging me. No. But my phone has decided to make a lot of other noises at this point. All right, let's turn it off. So, Plot Radar is a Kanban style tool that I use to track plot clues, themes, pieces of interesting detail, things that are going to come up and things that have come up and maybe have gone to the wayside or what have you. Best way to explain it is to take a look at it. Let's go over, thanks to Mr. James V, let's go over to our little show and tell area, shall we? Ding, ding. Oh, look, it's my red notebook. Oh my. This can go to the side. This can go to the side. Those are unnecessary. It's my little red notebook. So, I may have to refine this. But just to refresh everyone's memory, I have 6 columns on here. These are elements that have been closed or retired. It'll become a little more evident what that is as I get through here. These are elements that are immediate, so things that are coming up in the next session or things that I want to address in the next session. Little bits of detail where the players are searching for more information or they have an opportunity to learn more information. And these are things that are in the immediate next session, issues that I need to address. Approaching things are probably 2 to 3 sessions out. Now, the rest of this board, so we've got distant, we've got dangling, we've got dormant, right? These are for areas where things are not in play, things that are kind of hanging out that either have been forgotten about or that I have chosen to ignore. So, for instance, the Iron Keep is something that the players are aware of, but I'm not feeding them any more information on that. That's dangling for them right now. Dormant is something that I've fed them that they've forgotten about. Hey, guess what, everybody? We can check this one off. We'll figure out what that one was. Now, what I was going to say is, the important thing here is, between approaching and distant, I'm guessing, based on the layout of the dungeon, we only have 2 or 3 sessions left of this adventure. I would say, depending upon how deeply they, pursue things in the dungeon tonight or tomorrow, 3 is probably like a reasonable number of. It's a reasonable number of sessions, right? Probably 3, especially if we consider the fact that we're probably going to have some sort of wrap up in town or some further, like some sort of epilogue. For sure, we're going to do 3. But if you're thinking about this needs to be tackled next session, this is coming up in the next 2 to 3 sessions, stuff that's distant starts pushing into approaching. This column should be should be emptying out, right? You just don't have that much stuff going out that far. Now, one thing that we could do, because we're running an ongoing campaign, we could fill stuff into this distant on what's coming up for the next adventure. We could start putting that on the board. Okay, how can I start foreshadowing? How can I start introducing elements that are going to come up in the next adventure? That could start populating this column, right? So, Beast Be Care says 1 session to get to Belloc and the tree, 1 session to deal with Belloc, and 1 session to wrap up. Maybe. I mean, we'll take a look at the map here in a little bit and try to get sort of a feel for how far we think they're going to get in a given night. Like, I generally consider 5 rooms to be about what they can explore, assuming that there's at least 1 or 2 kind of meaty encounters in those rooms, right? Like, in a 3-hour session, we spend half an hour getting set up, and so that gives us 2.5 hours. So if you have 3 meaty sessions, or 3 real meaty encounters, I think that's about what you can anticipate, right? Which translates to a couple minor rooms that maybe they take note of some things, fool around with a little bit, but not full-blown, like, let's have a big combat or let's have an extended role-playing session or whatever, right? So, yeah, I think they will probably deal with Belloc and the tree, not this week, but next week, and then we'll have a week of wrap-up. Yeah, I don't know if they'll get to Belloc, but he's been touched on. They know about him. They don't know about the tree. That's okay for now. It's okay for now, but we need to start moving this into the approaching column. So, can't remember that ranger's name either, but I just wanted to add 1 or 2 things on the board here, right? So some of the stuff is it's a little messy. No, you're not. Don't make noise. Don't make noise. um, all right, so some of this stuff is starting to get a little redundant. We got the Birdsong Prophecy is out. That's dispatched. This whole thing with the goblins and the Grinnick is pretty. We know that Bellic is getting slaved. This is sort of these things are connected, right? This bone carving jade thing did not come up. Tax voices came up. The Applewood heart thing came up. I need to introduce an element here. I want to make sure it gets on the board. I don't know if that's big enough for you guys to read or not. But the untrustworthy ranger, that got introduced, and I'd like to explore that more. And that's kind of tied into this: how did Bellic's father really die, right? Or Thon's father really die? I want to put that in approaching. So Gregory and Dale's deal needs to come in. Our approaching column now. One of the issues we're having here is this column is stacking up tight, right? Because our sessions are getting compressed. We have a lot of elements that are now converging. I talked about this, I think last week, where when you start a campaign, you get to open up elements like a flower that's blossoming, or one metaphor that I used is you're crossing a river. So the river represents sort of the vagaries of play, and you're dropping pieces of foundation, pilings. You're dropping pilings into the river, but then it's up to the players to build the bridge that connects those pilings. So they may ignore some. They may, grasp tightly onto other ones, and connect things that you didn't expect to be connected, right? So you put the pilings in the water, and the players build the bridge that leads to the conclusion of the adventure. So now we're seeing a lot of these things begin to tighten up, knit up, get very closely connected, and that's why our approaching column is filling up. So I think it's also completely worthwhile to consider condensing these. Just write a new thing and condense these things. So let's. Yeah, the untrustworthy ranger is the one. So that part has not been explicitly defined. So Thon recognizes the ranger from his dad complaining about him, and he knows that his dad complained that the guy was sketchy and untrustworthy. Okay. Thon does not know that his father was poisoned, and therefore there can be no assignation of blame, because he doesn't know that a murder was committed. He thinks his dad died of natural causes. He thinks his dad died of just this Ilmater's cough, right? I'm going to put that on the board too. And there's a reason for that. So just to refresh everyone, and I'm going to make this immediate. So I'm going to move the goblins that are addicted to Grinnick. Is it closed? That we know. It's got to stay in this column, but that's fine. All right. So Bellic is getting slaves. This doesn't really seem. Yeah, okay. So what? I'm gonna put that into my closed category. But Ilmater's cough. I'm gonna put that in the immediate category. The background here is that Ilmater's cough is sort of a low-level curse that has been laid upon the village of Oakhurst, and Ilmater had a sort of a beachhead, a colony, for lack of a better term, of religious worshippers, sort of the Puritans of Ilmater who founded Oakhurst, and then the leader of the town got greedy for power, and Ilmater sort of turned his back on the town, and And so the leader went off into the woods and sort of got chased off. And the townsfolk decided to start worshiping Pelor, and that actually turned things around. So the town is much more open now to like religious influence, and they've turned from Ilmater to worshiping Pelor and a variety of other gods, right? Yeah, that's right. How did Thon's father really die is in Sparks. It's only in Sparks because there's no awareness on the map or of the players by how did Thon's father really die. At any rate, Ilmater's cough is a remnant of Ilmater's influence, and people get this cough that's just sort of like, I don't know, I'm pictured as kind of like a black lung, kind of not necessarily that harsh, but like this ongoing malady that they come down with, right? And everybody goes, oh, it's just part of living in town. His dad died of that, as far as he knows. What if that's not the case? What if we connect these things? So, BSB Care has a good metaphor here. It's like a log driver going down the river where you just float logs and then they jump, they leap. That reminds me of Frogger too much. I'm a man of a certain vintage, everyone. All right. So, let's just run down what our big what highlights we want to hit here, right? So what logs we want to make sure that we kind of push toward the players. This carving jade thing, it needs to come back around because I think they've forgotten about it. Although, have they? Like, Amy's well aware of it, so I don't think that's necessary. Like, I don't think we have to explicitly call that out. But the voices and this wood heart thing could definitely stand a little bit more reinforcement, more connection. Gregory and Dell's deal. That I think it's going to be very difficult not to address that in this immediate session, right? The twisted results of Belloq's experimentation, that's going to become obvious. This Greenick thing is only on here because I think we just need to make sure that we just need to put a bow on that and go, where does it come from? Oh, okay, here's the cider factory. All right. Twig blights definitely need to be reinforced. Some more information about Belloq would be nice because he's been talked about for 2 or 3 sessions in a row, and we haven't gotten a ton more information about who he is or what he's like. This untrustworthy ranger thing, get tied in. Gulthius tree needs to be foreshadowed. Turning bone into jade. Like, I don't want to read everything down, but one thing that I'm taking away from this is there are a lot of open plot threads that need to be hit upon. Okay? There's a lot of things that we have hinted at that the players would like to know more about, and they need to find a way to bring those things to the fore. Specifically, the twig blights need to be brought to the fore, and the Gulthius tree, right? That thing needs to kind of come forward in some way, shape, or form. Belloq definitely needs to get hit. Gregory and Dell definitely need to get bumped up. And I'd like to kind of somehow work in this new ranger angle that we introduced last session. I don't think there were any other new things that really popped forward last session. But the important thing is that this ranger clue was pretty big, right? All right, so those are all things that need to happen. That's our plot radar. Let's talk about how we solve this problem. So this has given us insight into like, okay, well, we've got a lot of things going on here, and if we just make a very short list without even looking at it, we know we need to talk about Belloq. We know we need to talk about Gregory and Dell. Maybe we need to talk about the ranger. Just because that was an interesting thing that had been introduced. And we might want to get around to the tree. Okay? At least we need to start foreshadowing the tree And we should also touch on tax voices. Okay, so those are the things that we definitely need to address, right? Yeah, some of the stuff. I mean, the whole idea here is that you can like draw a line between certain things, right? So you can draw a line between Belloc and the twig blights and the tree if you really want to, but condensing them down into one single post-it note gets a little weird, right? You just know that those things are connected. This twig blights and Tack possesses and commands the twig blights, that's a different story, right? And that's something that we've come up with that as a possibility for something that could happen. But you could draw that together. Ultimately, just get a bigger piece of paper. It's not a big deal, right? But our tool here, our plot radar, has done its job. It has given us insight into, okay, well, what information, how much information do we need to drop in this particular session to help the players understand, have an understanding of the plot that's unfolding, or to help them reach conclusions about the plot as it stands. If there was just a little bit of information, we're more in of like an exploratory mode where it's okay to just, drop pilings in the water and it doesn't matter if they're connected or not. Let's just see where it goes type of stuff. Then we could accomplish some of this stuff just by using journal entries or an offhand comment by a prisoner or a scroll fragment, or they find a map, or there's a warning scrawled on a wall. Those sorts of things that are very limited use type of hints. If you find something scrawled on the wall that says "Beware Belloc," okay, well, the only information you get is that guy's probably a bad guy. Okay, but you don't gain any more insight into what type of person they are, what powers they possess, what their modus operandi is, what their goals are, where they live, any of that. You have an idea like, oh, okay, beware Belloc. This must be Belloc's territory. We've moved in. Okay, well, that's great, but so those types of clues are kind of close-ended, right? They only lead someplace else if the players say, well, what would I know about Kundrukar? If I know it's a place, if I know that's the name for a place, do I know what this place is? And then you can allow them to have them make some intelligence history rolls or whatever you deem appropriate, and then they learn more information based on something that's not immediately in front of them. It's basically you saying, well, your character would know this, number one, because of who your character is, but number two, because you rolled adequately, etc. Right? But it's sort of a dead end type of clue. It's what I would, okay, maybe a better word for it is it's a terminating type of clue that it does not volunteer information in and of itself. When you have a lot of information like this on the board that you need to get out and you need to share, the most efficient way to get it into the hands and into the awareness of the players is to drop an NPC in their laps. Have someone talk who knows about this stuff, who can explain stuff, who can respond in real time. Now, that could be a spirit, that could be a refugee, someone fleeing, a victim who has somehow managed to escape. It could be a captured lackey or lieutenant or whatever. In extreme cases, you can have some sort of divine intervention where St. Cuthbert comes down and says, you are treading upon the desecrated ground of Belloc, the infidel, beware. Those who pass this way are corrupted, incontrovertibly, or something like that, right? So there are ways to do it, but the main thing is those are interactive, okay? So those are open-ended. You can shape that experience. You can shape that interaction. You can have back and forth. If their line of questioning doesn't really kind of click with the notes that you have prepared, the person can volunteer something for some reason, right? The problem with having something static that terminates like a handout is if they look at the handout and they spend 5 minutes looking over and they go, I don't get it, and they put it away, you don't have an opportunity because they go, well, no, but the code isn't that hard. No, it's just a simple, you know, if they decide to disregard it, it's done. It's over with. Like, without being super railroady, you don't have the opportunity to help share information and provide insight and enlightenment, right? So, this sort of situation, if it was a small thing, like, this is mean to say that it's small, but this is not a major point of the adventure. Is how did Thon's father really die? Right? That's something that we've invented, and it really hasn't even come up, and it's not a major. It's not like that's not the inciting incident for the adventure. Is like, oh, my father's been murdered and I'm off for vengeance. No, this is something that the players are completely unaware of. So it's a relatively minor thing. I could explore that by just having a note or something like that, which now kind of raises it up a little bit and gives you a little hint of what's happening, but doesn't really provide tons of insight. However, given all of the things that we have going on our plot radar, we need to, what this tells me is we need to have a fairly dense kind of info dump session, right? And I want you to think about, so we've talked about pacing before and wins and losses, and like, okay, this session was a win for the party, and this session was a win, and then they had a loss, etc. We've also talked about pacing in terms of build up, big fight, build up, denouement, build up, this classic story structure, that sort of thing. But, being elastic with your pacing to respond to what the players want and need in real time, okay? The same thing holds true with your clues and plot and information, right? So your plot development also needs to be elastic, but it can't just march, be the same, have the same rate of dispensation, right? You can't just turn the nozzle on. It tends to be sort of more like a dam breaking, right? So like there's a drip here and a drip here and a trickle and a little kind of rush, and then there's a cracking sound, and then they've figured it out. Let's kill the big bad guy who's behind all of this, right? So it also, builds like a piece of music would build. So keep that in mind, that like we are now at one of those points where if you were to just keep kind of like slowly dropping pieces of information, the players would be frustrated because the conclusions don't build on each other to build something greater. It's just they're going from stepping stone to stepping stone, and it feels very horizontal rather than like they're climbing a mountain and they're going to reach a peak of insight and action. BSBK makes another great point as well, which is when you have a static clue, like a handout or whatever, they can come to the wrong conclusion about what's happening. Like they can just draw the wrong conclusion from reading that and go, oh, okay, well, clearly this must be tied to da-da-da-da. And I'm not saying that you should just slam the door down on them and go, oh, no, it's not actually like that at all. It's okay to let the players surprise you with, oh, okay, here's how these clues are working. That's like they see it differently and they're chasing a different storyline, and pause to consider whether that storyline's more interesting. But there are times where you're all headed down the river together and you've got these logs, and in order for that to be true, it's a huge 90-degree turn, or it's not necessarily one is better than the other in terms of like what they're chasing. I guess my point is you have the ability to course correct and clarify when you have an interactive situation with some sort of NPC, some sort of role-playing scene, that you don't have that opportunity when you hand them a handout that they read and then they draw a completely wrong inference from it, and they go chase down somebody who's that's not their fun. They're not the big bad guy. They draw the misinterpretation that, oh, this person is a lieutenant in the mafia. Clearly, they must be involved. Let's go get them. Now, it can be fine for them to do that, and then you have this session where they go and they find the person who, and it turns out they're innocent or whatever it is, and then they have that role playing scene that that explains what's really going on or sheds further light into the situation. So I'm not saying don't be agile in where the plot is going and what the conclusion to the adventure might be. But what I am saying is sometimes you need to just kind of give it a little finesse, give it a little spin, help them understand stuff that you may have not stated clearly enough. We're always fighting that push me, pull me of, I'm going to drop some hints about what's happening, but I can't tell you the whole thing right off the bat. You're always fighting that. So having an interactive encounter is one of the ways that you can, in real time, respond to the intellectual curiosity of your players. All right. BSB Care points out that I had to dissuade Eric when he was looking at the goblin body from thinking that Gregory had been changed into a goblin. I mean, that's 100% true, right? And that was just a experimentation thing. But they really wanted, they were like, oh yeah, maybe this is just maybe that's what's going on. And I'm like, that's not what's going on. I think unlike, so improv would always, your improv training, your improv 101 would be like, yes, that is Gregory. You've just murdered him. Okay, well, one of the reasons that that's not helpful in this situation is we're building a story, right? We're trying to follow some sort of story structure where anticipation leads to a climax and then a reveal and denouement, right? And if you have the reveal without any anticipation, or the reveal, doesn't fulfill, doesn't provide a satisfying kind of explanation for what's going on, or the big thing is, if that was Gregory that had been murdered, now all of a sudden they're in a totally different problem-solving mode, rather than let's hunt down goblins and kill them with impunity. Oh no! Well, do we have to take this body back? And how are we going to explain this to Gregory's parents? And what's happening to Dell? And it changes the circumstances of the adventure completely. Now, that can be fine, but if it's something that the player suggests on the spur of the moment, that has huge implications for the plot, right? And has huge implications for the further direction of the adventure. So it's fine for you as the DM to go, I'm going to cut down my prep and just do a little course correction and keep you in line with the story that I have a good handle on, that I think is going to pay out in a way that I'm prepared for, versus, okay, guys, literally, I got to take 10 minutes and think about, yeah, that's Gregory. Okay, now all of a sudden you're putting yourself kind of over the precipice of where the story and where the pacing is going, right? You've completely changed the direction, the tone, the implications, etc. And it's hard, certainly for me as a trained improviser, but I would expect also for you to, in the moment, just accept what they said and go, yeah, that's him. Okay, that's the easy part. But then their reaction after that is all you're back on your heels. You're like, okay, well, if that's the case, then what does that mean? And I will tell you, I'm not one of those DMs who is great about coming up with the implications, those sorts of freewheeling implications, and just rolling with it right off the top of my head, right there in front of the players. It's a great place to end a session if you so choose, right? Oh, and we were at the end of the session, so I could have said, yeah, that's Gregory, and then I would have had a week to go off and think about it. Fine. But you've got choices before you. It's okay to say no, but you know that if, and the flip side, if you go back to that particular encounter, and then I'm going to stop talking about it. If you go back to that particular encounter, I said, you don't think it's him, If it is him, he's been severely deformed. His body has changed dramatically. Now, note that I did not say it's not him. I strongly, strongly implied that it's not him. But I also gave an excuse why the player and the character might think that. And also left the door open just a little bit for that to be true later. So that's the difference between just railroading somebody off of like, no, that's not the way it is, and doing a little course correction in real time. You could see how that might be true, but now that you look at it closer, you're not so sure. Now I got wiggle room where I can actually pick up that idea and run with it if I want. All right, let's move on to our second topic here today. Reskinning encounters, right? So we've got a few things that we need to address. And the party did not go as deeply into the dungeon as we anticipated. So that gives us the opportunity to mess around with things a little bit more than we expected to. So let's take a journey, shall we, into Bellic's lair, so to speak. All right. Let's go back to our little show and tell. Okay, so those of you who recall when we talked about like playing with your theme about a week ago, maybe a week and a half ago, this is the map that we drew up. So these are all the encounters that we have left. We did this. We did that. So those two have been taken off the map. I decided to get rid of these, right? Oh, I'm curious to see what the overhead view is in the new space. Yes. What I did, I don't remember if it was suggested or if I just came up with it. What I did was this empty shrine connects here, and then there's a secret door that connects here. So they can go to the empty shrine. And that's sort of the choices before them. They can go directly into Bellic's lab. They can go into the empty shrine. We've got these garden encounters. There's a Chardalon's shrine over here. There's the small library. And then there's this underpass that leads down here to really... This is really the main realm of Belloc, right? I would be very surprised if we get past the library tomorrow night, because the players like to explore a lot. There's one. This is big. 2. There's going to be at least one encounter in here. 3. There's potential for encounter here. 4 and 5 in our library. I'm looking at what we have to tackle, and I think that's as far as we're going to get. And there's not a lot of opportunity to skip stuff. They could skip this. They could skip this shrine thing, right? That can go away. They could skip one of these rooms. Okay, fine. You can't really get to this place without hitting a Chardalon's shrine, so that's going to burn some time. And the library, which we've talked about before, the library is going to be a place of interest for them. A library is always a place of interest for your players, and if you ignore the opportunity to do some world building at the very least, and drop some major plot hints, for sure, at the most, in the library, you're passing up a prime opportunity. You're almost, I would dare say, you're derelict in your duty as a DM. that if you make the library just kind of like, oh yeah, you go through the library, there's a bunch of books. It's very unrewarding. It's such an iconic encounter that I don't know that you can get away with doing that without disappointing your players. So this is what we've got. All right. The theme of this whole area that we talked about last week is Bellic's experimentation and the Grinnick addiction and things like that, right? If we look at these areas as written, the shrine, the shrine as written is boring, right? It nothing happens. You push your way through this stuck door, only to get inside, and there's no treasure to be found. There's no further clues. It's been raided or looted or whatever. That's not interesting. Okay. We've now made it at least marginally more interesting by having a secret door that connects to a different area, kind of a back door into the dungeon. Bellic's lab, as written, is a bunch of goblin encounters. It's essentially like Goblin HQ down here, and it has some of his goblin lackeys who are performing experiments, and it has a bunch of goblins who are repairing weapons, and etc., etc., etc. So it's not very. At this point in our adventure, I think having mass combat against the goblins is not a rewarding encounter. It is not challenging. It is not interesting. It does not present a challenge. I mean, I'm getting a little redundant here. But the point is, we fought goblins. You can't fight goblins like 3 or 4 times in a row. I think my wife wants to make an on-camera appearance.
No, I was just looking for my cold medicine.
No, where's my cold medicine? What did you do with my stuff?
Mostly I took off my headphones and I heard you be like, listen, you fought goblins. What more do you need to know?
My betrothed, ladies and gentlemen. So let's do a rundown quick of what's in all these areas, and then think about how we can tweak the settings. There's a bunch of goblins. I don't find that personally interesting at this stage, at this point, the way that the encounter has spooled out. Now listen, your party may have gone, straight north, straight up through the goblin areas, and barreled down the well, and they're ready to fight more goblins. That's fine. Your mileage may vary. We have these arboretums. The problem I have a big problem with these arboretums, which is that all 4 of them are basically identical. And there's these 2 garden areas that are complete mirrors of each other, and they maybe have like a bugbear in them or something like that. I think there's an opportunity to do something more interesting with this area. If you're going to have these 4 rooms, especially when they're 4 big rooms like this, you got to do one of 2 things. If you're going to keep them as written, just hand wave like, okay, you open that door, it looks like, the first time they open it, go, all right, it's this huge mushroom field, and they're growing all kinds of things in it, right? And then the second and third time, you're like, it's another one. It's another one. I don't like doing that, because I don't like having encounters on the map that are set up for that type of design needs to be handled in a montage. Okay? It is not well handled in like, okay, now we're going to explore this room. Okay, and then you go into deep detail. Oh, where are you going to search? And they find the exact same thing because it's the exact same room. But you make them go through that sort of tedious, laborious, what's your marching order? You ratchet up the tension, and then it feels like either there's no payoff, and you're like, well, why did we go into like hardcore, marine prowling mode when it's just a bunch of mushrooms? Or it feels like you're screwing them over, right? Oh, well, you didn't say that you did that, so then you're going to get attacked by the shambling mound. or it feels like you might be shorthanding them just a little too much. Right. So these areas are difficult. I want to think about ways to make them more interesting, to fill them out and make each of them at least a little bit, give each of them a little bit of flair, something interesting going on in each one. I'm not saying that you need to have a full-blown encounter or huge room descriptions for each of them, but as written, it feels a little hollow, right? Now, to go back to the montage thing, it's perfectly legit to say, okay, you open this room, and then just sort of fast forward them. You open this room, you see a bunch of mushrooms, you search the room fairly thoroughly, you don't find anything of interest. It looks like a standard, or it looks like it's strictly used as a field. In fact, you open 2 more doors, you go down the corridor, open 2 more of those things. They also are fields that have been recently dug and planted, and it looks like from what you can tell, there's an extensive farming operation going on here. Is there anything you want to do with that in mind? Oh yeah, I want to take some samples of the mushrooms. Great, fine, done. Okay, we do it. You deal with it that way. So that's something to think about. This Shadow or Shardalon's Shrine thing, I'm tempted to mess around with, but I feel like that Shadow encounter is going to be probably a little tricky for them, so I think I'm going to leave that the way it is. The library, as I stated, we need to put some work into, right? That needs some book titles, etc. All right. So with all of that in mind, what's the most important takeaway here? And I think the most important takeaway is we've got all of these things. And really, we don't have Belloc. The Belloc is the only thing that's not on this list, right? All right. So these are all the things that we need to deal with. Instead of there are some encounters where it's like a bugbear and some goblin or skeleton servants or something like that. Like, it's one encounter that maybe I'll reskin a little bit, but that does add a little bit of spice to this area. Specifically, I think the idea of this mutated gardener is fairly interesting. But we also have this idea, this Grinnick addiction. We've been kicking around the idea that Thon's father was poisoned rather than dying of quote-unquote natural causes. So that, and we have this whole Grinnick thing going on, right? So I feel like I'm talking in circles a little bit. Time for lunch. So with that in mind, somehow we need to pay off that there's some sort of alchemical setup that is providing Grinnick, that is providing these drugs to the goblins 1 level up, right? We did that whole trade log thing. So that trade needs to pay off. All right. That brings me to the idea that maybe there's some sort of brewmaster or alchemist or something like that. So not only is there this mutation that's going on with the goblins, but there's somebody is concocting this stuff. And I think that figure or that idea provides us with our entree into a unifying idea of all these things, which is either have an alchemist or a gardener type of character who's roaming in here somewhere or is located in here somewhere that the players can interrogate, that they can interact with. One of the things that is traditional in an adventure of this style is that the big bad guy has a lieutenant. There's no lieutenant in this. I mean, technically, Belloc is the lieutenant and the Gulfius tree is the big bad guy. But I really feel like those two things are so, pardon the pun, intertwined that you can't really separate the two of them out. And not only that, but they appear together right? So the function of having the lieutenant, which is to foreshadow the big bad guy and to rat out the big bad guy, is defeated if the two of them are together all the time. So we could introduce a sub boss, essentially, who's somebody who's in league with Belloc, maybe is not particularly loyal to him, but maybe has some sort of, Belloc has some sort of sway over him, etc. Right? So I think there's a prime opportunity to tackle all of these things that we have on our plot radar by putting one powerful NPC who's there as a role-playing encounter. And if the players decide to fight him, that he will be the challenge of 10 goblins or whatever, that's fine. But if they decide not to fight him, they will have a long and potentially fruitful conversation about what's going on. So that's one thing when you look at reskinning the encounters. Like, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to unify the themes that I've established in previous sessions, and I'm trying to find a way to drop some more exposition and do some more foreshadowing and help the players build toward the conclusion of the adventure. Now that I'm, 3 sessions out from the end, let's make that happen. So that's something I'm going to think about. These Gardens Arboretums definitely need something. Doesn't have to be a big thing, but it would be nice if it had something. As BSB Care says, there could be different types of plants or some sort of experimentation going on here. There's some interesting... BSB Care has some interesting thoughts here too, like an RP encounter in the lab where the alchemist accidentally recognizes Tack and mistakes her for her sister. So those are all great hooks, and what that demonstrates is there's an opportunity for a lot of these plot threads to come together by putting an alchemist or a brewer or a gardener in here who's more willing to talk than they are to fight. And if we could just go back and look at the play styles of our characters. So when we talk about reskinning this dungeon, yes, we have our themes, and yes, we have the needs of tying the plot together. But also look at what they are and tie them or reskin them to suit the play style of your players. My players love talking to people. They love figuring out a mystery, dealing with a puzzle. Hey, this is a prime opportunity to introduce some sort of puzzle. This shrine is an opportunity to introduce another type of puzzle. The library is an opportunity to introduce some sort of puzzle. You could have, in a less overt fashion, some sort of puzzle going on with the gardening. What are they brewing? Also, I think one of these rooms, I don't care where it is, has to be sort of like the brewery central for the vile things, for the Grinnick, right? There needs to be a Grinnick brewery in this part of the complex somewhere, right? If we look at our themes, this is alchemy and experimentation, and then we're going to transition to the dark gifts of the Golthius tree, right? So we can use this area to foreshadow that a little bit. Maybe we foreshadow that in the in the shrine here or in the library. Maybe our NPC, wherever they live, can foreshadow that a little bit. So, when you talk about reskinning, big 3 elements. Number 1, what themes have you already established that are different than what's represented on the board? Number 2, what sort of themes and clues are you trying to unify, and can you do that by reskinning these encounters? Unify, explicate, make clear to your players, etc. And then number 3, what sort of encounters are on the board that may not mesh with the play style of your party? So, this has a potential to be a lot of kind of tedious combat. Let's compress it. Let's change one of the encounters to be a role-playing encounter rather than a combat encounter. Let's change the nature of the combat encounter. Rather than being 16 goblins, maybe it can be Maybe the gardener is a shambling mound or something like that. That sounds fascinating to me, right? Like shambling mound comes up out of the earth. Oh, so like, oh, I can hear Amy freaking out already. Both Amy and Havana freaking out. uh, so those are all things to consider when you're going to reskin an encounter. Very good, very good. So I think that will be interesting. Yeah, I mean, the party might attack him on sight. Here's my, and this is not by any means a piece of genius insight. However, if your NPC is not particularly loyal or beholden to their boss, to the big bad guy or whatever, and that's essentially the function that we're trying to establish here, right? Then they have every reason to strike a deal, to surrender, to bargain for their life, or to bargain in exchange for whatever. So even if they do attack them on sight, if the guy takes one round of hits and goes, wow, these guys are going to murder me, I don't want that, throws his sword down, let's negotiate a surrender. Okay, well now, yeah, it's not an RP scene between equals. Now it turns into an interrogation role-playing scene, but it's still a role-playing scene. So don't be afraid to let that guy go. Hey, hang on. I'm just the hired help. That's a classic, right? But it's easy in the heat of the moment where dice are rolling, the characters are throwing big abilities about, a fireball goes off, like whatever it is. If they're invested in it, it's easy to just like let that guy get murderated. He goes from being an interactive clue to being a static one, right? He goes from being an open-ended experience to being one that's terminated. Literally terminated. All right, those are the two big things that I wanted to tackle today. A leap ahead. So I'm looking at the calendar. It's the end of June. We'll definitely have a week or two off for. I don't know if we'll have off for the 4th of July, but we'll definitely have a week off for Gen Con. So that's going to take a bite out of our calendar. And I'm looking at Tales, right? So Tales is a big book, and it's 7 dungeons, and they're only loosely connected. And as we've discussed before, this group of players likes puzzles, and they like interaction, and they like figuring stuff out. And I'm looking at Forge of Fury, and I just don't think it's the right fit. Even though I had sort of like come up with some ideas, and it's quote unquote the natural sequel to. It's the natural sequel to Sunless Citadel. I don't see it. It's too much exploration fighting. It's too much dungeon crawling, and not enough interaction that I think is going to be fruitful for the party. And not only that, but I'm looking at the calendar going, all right, we can probably play one more chapter out of Tales from the Yawning Portal, and then Tomb of Annihilation will come out, and we can move on to that if we so choose. It'll be available for us to move on to if that's what we want to do, or we play something completely differently if the players aren't into Tomb of Annihilation. The other thing that I have been weighing is the fact that thanks to bumps from chat and donations and some of the mechanics that I've tweaked in the game, the party is more powerful than your standard 2nd or 3rd level characters, right? They're not a full level ahead in terms of their power, although some of that will be borne out tomorrow night. They're going to be 3rd level for the first time, and they gain some significant new abilities at 3rd level. So let's see what that cranks out to be. But with that in mind, I don't know that going directly to Forge of Fury makes sense either. So I haven't pinned this down for certain, but my gut inclination at this point is when we wrap up Sunless Citadel and we have a little epilogue dealing with who's been involved in what in town, and the party kind of squares that away. Our next foray, the next dungeon that we're going to tackle, is we're going to tackle White Plume Mountain. I think they will be far enough ahead in their experience that they'll probably gain another level. They'll probably be 4th level by the time that we're done. Maybe not, but they'll be a good ways into it for sure. And I think between the bumps that they get from chat and kind of in between that and just their own ability to play to optimal tactics, I think they're going to be fine for White Plume Mountain. I'm excited about it because it's definitely a very old school adventure. I've never run it and I've never played it, so I'm looking forward to diving into it and kind of picking things apart. I know it's another dungeon crawl, and it's not necessarily like it doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of like what rooms are next to each other. I think a lot of that will be alleviated by having it be part of the Iron Keep. I also think that if we attach it to the Iron Keep in this weird extra dimensional space, it makes a lot more sense for it to be this bizarre, janky, nonsensical thing where there's a giant crab that talks to you and whatnot. That old school funhouse type of format is far more suited to them exploring the Iron Keep. And I think I don't think any of the players have played it, so I think they'll have fun exploring this old school module for the first time. So that's the buzz on that. That's what I'm looking for. A leap ahead is I think we're going to skip over Forge of Fury. They're going to come into White Plume Mountain a little bit underleveled, but I think it'll balance itself out in fairly short order. So yeah, I think it's going to be fun all the way around. And I was looking at maybe doing the arc to be Sunless Citadel, Forge of Fury, White Plume Mountain. But it's so much dungeoneering, and at the pace that we're going, it's going to take us 10 sessions to get through Sunless Citadel. I'm going to assume it's going to take us another 10 sessions to get through White Plume Mountain, for sure. Well, okay, that's that's 5 months. We'll be able to tackle Tomb of Annihilation at that point. So it'll be available. So rather than having to play all of these things, I think it makes sense to just go directly to White Plume Mountain. All right, there we go. So the final thing that is on our agenda today, I just want to remind you all that our 24-hour streaming marathon, a gaming marathon for charity, supporting the Alzheimer's Association, starts this Friday night at 8 o'clock. We are kicking things off with, well, let's just take a look at the calendar. There it is. We're kicking things off with Black Bag Vikings at, oof, boy, this is small for me, at 8 o'clock on Friday night. Then it looks like Werewolf. I should have blown this up a little bit. I want to blow it up in your chat window, guys. More, full screen, more bigger. Yeah, so Werewolf Wild West. I don't remember who's jamming that. Jordan Caves Callerman is doing Roll for Shoes starting at 4 a.m. in the morning. At 8:30 in the morning, I will be running a session I call Unlikely Heroes with Mr. Brian Patterson as a player. The concept here is that all of the heroes are just tourists on the Sunset Strip, or not on the Sunset Strip, on the Vegas Strip. They're tourists in Vegas. Little green men from outer space come down and begin wreaking havoc, and the side effect is that our particular group of characters at the table all start to mutate and gain various superpowers. And using the Ultimate Powers book from the Marvel Superheroes game, we will be assigning them random powers, and then also through the use of your donations and whatnot, unlocking further potential of their powers, etc. And it's possible that they might lose some of their powers. At 1 o'clock Pacific on Saturday, Brian takes over the DMing seat, the hot seat for me, and runs a session of Carthune, his original campaign world that he's been developing for well over a decade that has been the basis for his D20 Monkey web comic, etc., for the campaign that they play inside the comic, and which was kickstarted about a year ago or so, and has been licensed to Evil Hat Productions, and they actually did the fulfillment on the book. And that's not actually on sale publicly. If you're a Kickstarter backer, you should have gotten your copy, but it won't go on sale until the middle of July. Good news. We're going to give away a copy of the book. Evil Hat has kicked in a copy of the book that we'll have Brian sign. We've also got copies of Kaiju Incorporated, which Brian did the art on, both the RPG and the board game. And if you're a fan of, say, Machi Koro, Tom Vassal over on the Dice Tower said, I actually like Kaiju Incorporated better than I like Machi Koro. So think about that. So we've got those. I'm sure Brian will be happy to sign those if you so choose. Those will be part of the prize package that we're going to be giving away to donors and viewers. And also a copy of Fate Core, as well as some other tie-in novels and things like that Evil Hat has been so generous to contribute. And that's just a small part of the prize patrol that has been lined up by Megan and Jordan. Did a great job kind of spearheading this whole thing. So I got to give credits where credit is due. And then we round out the evening with Wizards, Warriors, and you. So that's what's going on this weekend. And we're hoping to, I think we raised over $4,000 last year. We're going to try and crank it up a little bit and raise over $5,000. We'll see how we do. I'm excited about Brian being in town, number one. I'm excited to play in his game, number two. I'm excited to run this Marvel Superheroes game, and I think there's a stellar lineup of the rest of the stuff. And on top of it all, it's all going to be taking place in our new space that we just moved into over the weekend. So if you have not seen it, tune in tomorrow night for Iron Keep Chronicles, and you'll get to see all of the stuff that we talk about actually play out live before your very eyes. Thursday night is, of course, Mr. David Crennan's Star Wars Edge of the Empire game, Never Tell Me the Odds. So tune in for that show. And then, like I said, Friday night, it all kicks off with Mr. Wes Otis and his team of Black Bag Cthulhu Warriors. Can you really be a Cthulhu Warrior? You can, but only for a very short time. So, that is... I've been talking to you guys like the camera has been on me. And I realized it's been the calendar the whole time. So, I was like, I was doing some cute hand gestures and facial expressions. And then I looked down and I'm like, oh yeah, no, they're just looking at the calendar. Yeah. All right, very good. So clearly it's time for me to have lunch. I encourage you to do the same. If I know my lovely bride, I think there's a trip to Chipotle in my future. So I'm going to take care of that. I want you to take care of whatever you need to take care of so that you are well fortified to join us tomorrow night for the Iron Keep Chronicles. And until then, hey, let's dungeon. Yes, 116 out of 116. I don't care about the 0.5 or the 0.2 BSB care. You're not the boss of me. I get to round up if I want to round up.